time in his young UFC career, 13th ranked Sean O'Malley is going to be taking on a ranked opponent, and you've got it. It's the 35-year-old, nearly 36-year-old young Punisher, Pedro Munhoz. Now, Matt, I did a deep dive on this one because I looked at it and thought, isn't this strange? Like, wasn't Frank Castle in his mid to late 30s? So if you're Pedro Munhoz and you're the young Punisher, but you're on the level of the real Punisher, when do you drop the young out of it and just become the Punisher?
Shout out to John Bernthal, because that's one of the best shows on Netflix, The Punisher. Highly recommended if you've never watched it. He's too old to be the young anything. My rule of thumb is, if you're Wonder Boy, if you're the young X, Y, or Z, the second you turn 30, drop it. Even at 29, it's a little weird, but I'll let you get away with it. The second you hit 30, quit calling yourself the young Punisher.
Either way, for Pedro Munhoz, he's on the worst stretch of his UFC career right now. 1-4 in the 5-on-in now. Could he make some arguments in some of these fights?
Have any of them been boring to watch?
No, sure they haven't. I mean, there's some Fight of the Night sprinkled in there. He's got 4 Fight of the Nights in his UFC career. He's got 3 performance bonuses. And if you do look at it, I mean, for Pedro Munhoz, the fight against Dominic Cruz, he hits him with like this short left in tight that Cruz wobbles to the ground, gets right back up. Munhoz kind of like, he's so excited he falls and then he gets back up, lands a hook, drops Dominic Cruz, and then it's like, uh-oh, is this the Keith Peterson stage of a Dominic Cruz fight? Well, referee goes, no, we're not going to make that mistake again. And then Munhoz, round 2, round 3, doesn't really fall off, but Dominic Cruz gets back into the fight and starts to land wicked volume. It's not like there was a ton of accumulation, but he threw a lot at him, and Munhoz just couldn't really figure it out. And that's a crazy thing. For Munhoz to be this power puncher to some people, for him to land that knockout blow over Cody Garbrandt, and be known as somewhat of a fast starter, back up, because that's not really the case. Munhoz actually does start to land volume as fights go on. I look at his fight against Frankie Edgar. He has a really strong 5th round in that fight. I thought he beat Frankie Edgar. Most people thought he beat Frankie Edgar. 19-4 on MMA decisions thought that he won that one. But regardless, split decision loss in that main event. Lost to Jose Aldo. Very close competitive fight. A loss to Cruz last time out.
The Jose Aldo one, he got pieced up and bad.
But my point out of all of these Pedro Munhoz fights are, you don't want to blink like a Kai Kara France fight, because they are so much fun and they're so action-packed. And the biggest talking point, if you want to go to your friend that's a big Sean O'Malley fan, you want to go and say, wow, I understand this guy's great. He's understanding of distance. He throws great boxing combinations. He rolls with the shots. This is the biggest thing that I have for Pedro Munhoz in his fights. In the Dominic Cruz fight, he landed 19 of 26 leg kicks. Against Aldo, 37 of 42. Against Jimmy Rivera, 40 of 52. These are just examples of his last 3 fights. Pedro Munhoz is a wicked leg kicker. Sean O'Malley obviously has susceptibility to getting leg kicked. Vera was a big example of that because that's his only loss. But in his other fights, that has been a thing because he does tend to stand heavy on his lead leg before he switches stance and moves around. But he doesn't really check leg kicks. Maybe Pedro Munhoz can make that the X factor to then beat Sean O'Malley. But that's a big talking point for Pedro Munhoz's game.
It is a very big component of his game because he does like to set up his bigger power shots with that lower leg kick. And of course, when you do throw big power shots on the feet, it makes your opponent much more stationary if you start to cut down on their legs because they will be much more hittable as a result of it. The only zag I'm going to take here is, the problem with Pedro Munhoz is that, to quote our great-grandmother, he is slower than molasses on a cold winter's day. And it is the truth. If you just look at the skill set of Pedro Munhoz, he's a skilled striker. He's extremely skilled with his jiu-jitsu. Go back and watch the majority of his earlier fights. That's how he's able to win. He's that good of a grappler. The problem is, he's so slow, it's not even funny. Like, you have to stand there and almost want to be hit by Pedro Munhoz to be hit by him. And a lot of the fighters that you bring up, especially with the leg kick totals, are there to be hit or have to have the fight in boxing range slash wrestling range to have success. Jimmy Rivera, a good example of that. Frankie Edgar, Dominic Cruz. All 3 of those fighters fight in almost the exact same manner. They have to be close to you, so there's the threat of the takedown, and none of them really kick. They all have to use their hands to do a lot of their offensive work on the feet. Sean O'Malley's 7 inches taller than Pedro Munhoz and throws kicks, though, and I really do think
5 inches of height, 7 inches of reach.
My bad. 5 inches taller and has 7 inches of reach on him. I think stylistically, this is a very poor matchup for Pedro Munhoz, and I really do think that this is strategic matchmaking by the UFC's part, because there's 13 guys in the top 15 of bantamweight who could probably beat Sean O'Malley. That's how competitive the weight class is. That's how good anybody can be on any given day. The problem is, when you look at guys' X factors and how some people can exploit the weaknesses of others, Pedro Munhoz is slow, and he's very hittable in a lot of his fights. Sean O'Malley's very fast and very accurate in the majority of his fights. And I'm going to go back to a boxing fight that happened a couple of weeks ago. Joe Smith Jr. versus Artur Beterbiev. It was a fight that a lot of people were excited for, and Artur Beterbiev won by knockout. How he won by knockout was Pedro Munhoz, who fights a lot like Joe Smith Jr. Joe Smith Jr. would lean in and then try to throw his power shots. Beterbiev would take 1.5 steps back so that when your chin is forward while you're throwing your shots, you're basically perfectly in position for me to hit you with mine. Sean O'Malley fights exactly like that. He's in and out of range constantly. He's almost like a cobra. He's either all the way in or all the way out. And that's going to make it very difficult for Munhoz to land those kicks because if they are in clinching range, well, Munhoz isn't Justin Gaethje, and that's the only guy I've ever seen land consistent calf kicks from a clinch. And I do think that just physically, due to the fact that he is smaller in this matchup, it's going to make this fight very difficult for him on the outer edge of his range, where Chito Vera physically matches up a lot better with Sean O'Malley and has a lot of the same strengths that a guy like Pedro Munhoz does. So I think Munhoz can make this fight very difficult, but the problem is his one glaring weakness is his speed. And if anything is special about Sean O'Malley, if he's an outlier in any one category, he throws punches like Aroldis Chapman used to throw baseballs.
Number 1 all-time, regardless of time, but also division, in strikes landed per minute at 8.37, and the biggest strike differential ever in the UFC at 5.01. Has the level of competition been there? Not really. I mean, Chris Moutinho was there to get hit. He just continued to walk him down and eat shots, and it was a fight of the night somehow. But when you look at it for Sean O'Malley, 2 fight of the nights, 4 performance bonuses, 7-1 including Dana White's Contender Series. And if you really do focus on it, other than his debut against Terrion Ware, every other fight has been on a pay-per-view card, whether that's prelims or main card. Sean O'Malley obviously draws, but he has that speed factor. And you go back and you look at some of these performances. His last time out was about 6 months ago. He beat Raulian Paiva. Again,
it was barely a fight.
Unranked fighter, but he looked amazing. He lit him on fire. So for Sean O'Malley, he's ranked. Now he's finally taking on a ranked test. And for Pedro Munhoz at 35, drop the young Punisher. But again, those leg kicks could add up in this fight. That could be a huge, huge difference maker. So we look at the odds in this one. Munhoz open a plus 210, still roughly there. If you look at it for O'Malley, open around a minus 250, still roughly there as well. We have a look at the Tapology votes. It's a little bit of a popularity contest sometimes over there. I'm going to say over under 85% O'Malley.
I think they'll be closer to 50, but O'Malley will be the favorite.
904 total votes, 85% O'Malley, 46% by decision, 48% by knockout, 15% that have Pedro Munhoz, 41% by decision, 43% by knockout. Pedro Munhoz has never been finished in the UFC. Maybe this is the time.
I think it is. I really do. Pedro Munhoz is hittable because this is the wild thing that people like to forget just because he hasn't been knocked out. Pedro Munhoz is one of the best chins in this division's history. Easily. Like, Munhoz gets hit by shots that would send Cody Garbrandt to another division. He can eat massive shots in the feet. But the issue is, how do we know he has a really good chin? He's been hit clean a lot throughout his career. And I remember Munhoz credited a lot of his own chin for, I trained with a national Brazilian boxing champion. Like, I have some really high-level boxing in my back pocket. Sean O'Malley's not going to play the boxing game with you, though. He's either all the way out or all the way in. And I think that does negate a lot of the advantages Munhoz has coming into this fight. But what I do like about this matchup is that if O'Malley is able to beat Pedro Munhoz, I do feel like it's going to eliminate that part of the conversation of, well, they could land a leg kick and the fight's over. If you beat a guy like Pedro Munhoz, and let's say he leg kicks Sean O'Malley 5, 6, 7 times in the first round, and O'Malley knocks him out in the second or the third, let's say, that's like perfect situation for Sean O'Malley. I would much prefer that than him winning this fight via like 15-second knockout, because we'd learn a lot more about O'Malley in that situation. So I have Suga, but this is a tough fight for him.
I did see that clip of Sean O'Malley on his podcast talking about a fan question about the Vera rematch and the leg kick, and he just kind of was really dismissive of it, and I'm sure in training he drills defending those time and again, because he does switch stances a lot, and especially when he's on the back foot, he's still a very accurate and heavy striker. So I do like O'Malley with the speed advantage in this one, but again, I laid out a game plan for Pedro Munhoz. I could do it either way, and if you see value in him as an underdog, maybe you end up with him, but both of us going with Sugar Sean O'Malley to get the win, bringing it back to the MMA lab. It should be a great fight. Strickland Pereira and the 2 title fights up at the top that you're not going to want to miss. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.